get off to a good start. He was a fatherless child who, at the age of 15, moved away from home. By the age of 25, he was convicted of second-degree murder and received a 17 years to life prison sentence. While incarcerated, Terrance had a life-changing experience. He became a man free in spirit. Today, Terrance works with parolees and at-risk and troubled youth. He is the founder of Empowering the Fatherless, a nonprofit whose mission is to help fatherless children realize that they're worthy and to help men learn how to become good fathers. Terrance is also a member of the Rotary Club of Saratoga, so he's a fellow Rotarian. I know you'll be inspired by this amazing and powerful story. Please give Terrance a warm Rotary Club of Morgan Hill welcome.
Ladies and gentlemen, honored and distinguished guests, good afternoon. First, I would like to say what an honor and privilege it is to be here today. I would like to thank Arlene and Ira for inviting me. My name is Terrance Hunter, and the title of my speech is My 30 Years with the California Department of Corrections. For the record, the title of my speech does not clearly reflect my journey, so I will do so. On the night of February the 25th, 1985, while I was in a state of rage, I shot and killed a close friend. It was my belief that he had divulged information about my infidelity to my girlfriend, and I was someone who had a serious temper back then, and I considered that betrayal. I was convicted of second-degree murder, and I received a 17 years to life prison sentence. Following my conviction, I was transferred to Old Folsom State Prison, which was the most violent prison in the state of California at that time. And that's because you had 5,000 men serving time there, and the majority of us were serving time for murder. So violence and riots were the order of the day. Needless to say, I remained someone who conducted myself violently because I believed in when you're in Rome, you do as the Romans do. So I continued to be violent my first portion of my incarceration. However, after about 10 years of incarceration, I woke up one day and realized just how violent of a person I'd become. I knew that I could not return to society with such an attitude and mentality. So I decided to embark upon a journey of self-improvement. I was at San Quentin State Prison at the time. My journey of self-improvement began with my enrollment in the Alternatives to Violence Basic Workshop. In this 3-day workshop, participants are introduced to the concept of conflict resolution. In other words, we acquire skills that enable us to resolve potentially volatile situations in nonviolent manners. I have utilized such skills to not only resolve personal conflicts, but also to resolve conflicts between fellow prisoners. My experience in the basic workshop was so rewarding that I also completed the advanced and training for trainer workshops, and I became an AVP facilitator. As an AVP facilitator, I was not only sanctioned to facilitate workshops attended by fellow prisoners, but I also facilitated workshops attended by citizens from the outside community who came inside San Quentin to learn conflict resolution skills under my leadership and guidance. In essence, I became a non-violence advocate, speaking out against all forms of violence. One day I was on San Quentin's lower recreational yard and a fellow prisoner mentioned a program called Kairos. He said that in the Kairos program, a group of Christian men come inside San Quentin to spend 3 days with inmates participating in the program. Since it was a faith-based program and I was raised in the Baptist church, I decided to sign up for the program. On the first day of this 3-day workshop, me and the other prisoners met in the Protestant chapel with a group of Christian men who came inside the facility. After our meet and greet session was over, we were divided into groups in which there were a few prisoners seated at each table with a few of these Christian men. Once I was seated at my table, the man in charge said, "We are going to go around the table and introduce and tell the group something about ourselves." Well, through self-talk, I told myself I'm not telling them anything about me. I was not into sharing personal information. However, when the men at my table began divulging very intimate information, I felt obligated to do the same. So when it was my turn to speak, I told them my name. I told them I had killed a friend of mine in 1985 and that I was serving a 17 years to life sentence. I went on to tell the group that I've never met, do not know who my biological father is, something that I was very sad and disappointed about as a kid, but as time went on, and I watched my childhood friends enjoy the relationships they have with their dads, I became very angry, bitter, and resentful. I then went on to tell them that by the time my mother had married my stepfather, I was 12 years old and I'd already come to a conclusion I didn't need a father anymore. So I made no attempt to establish any sort of relationship with him. And when I was 15 years old, him and I had a disagreement in which he tried to punish me. And I told him instead, I'm just moving away from home. So I moved away from home at 15, never to return. And I explained that I left home because of the poor relationship I had with my stepfather. Well, at that time, the man that was seated to my right, he turned to me and he said, poor relationships with fathers is not limited to stepfathers. And he began to tell the group about his terrible relationship he had with his biological father and how his father treated him and his mother. And as he was telling his story, tears were rolling down his face. And that caught my attention because that marked the very first time I'd ever seen a man cry. And this man wasn't trying to hold his tears back. He didn't seem like he was ashamed he was crying. He just let them flow. And later that morning, when we took our first break, this man approached me and he said, I feel like there's a connection between you and I. If I write you, would you write me back? And though I wasn't into corresponding, for some strange reason, I said, yes, if you write me, I'll write back. Well, for the remaining 3 days, me and this man held conversations that I found myself enjoying. As a matter of fact, I was having a great time in the workshop, period, because of the atmosphere. The man that I'm talking about, his name is Bruce Hodgson, and he's sitting at the table over there. Bruce, would you please stand? As I said, I would talk with this man throughout the remainder of the workshop. And on the final night, when myself and the other prisoners were heading towards the Protestant chapel, we heard a multitude of voices coming from the chapel, which we couldn't understand. The chapel was empty for the prior 2 days. So when we arrived, there was more than 100 people in there, men and women whom we had never seen before. And they were members of the Kairos community outside San Quentin walls. They were from the community. And it was at that time that I met Bruce's wife, Connie. Connie, would you please stand? I would find out that Bruce is a real estate agent, broker, and land developer, and they live in Saratoga. They were not permitted to visit me at San Quentin because they come in as volunteers. But shortly after I completed that program, I transferred to the correctional training facility in Soledad, and they immediately filled out visiting forms and began visiting me. They visited me on weekends. They visited me on holidays. They visited me on my birthday. When they found out we could receive certain things, in particular, care packages every quarter, they began sending me 30-pound packages that contained food items, clothing items, and cosmetics. Not only were we communicating on visits, but we were corresponding via letters, and they encouraged me to call them whenever I wanted to, which was quite a gesture, being that all calls made by prisoners are collected. And so quite often I would call them, and Connie and Bruce would be on 2 different phones. And Connie would say, "Terrance, can you call back?" And I'd get back in line and call back 2 or 3 times. And that was a regular thing, which I couldn't believe they were paying such high phone bills. So our bonding started taking place, and I started looking at them as family. And one year, they took a Caribbean cruise. And when they returned from the cruise, Connie would learn her father, Sam, was in the hospital in critical condition. So when I called them to see whether or not they made it home safely from their cruise, Connie said, "Terrance, I have some terrible information for you. My father's in the hospital." So I went to a friend who's a good card maker, a prisoner, and I told him I needed a rush order on a get well card for a friend. Since Connie and her family are devout Catholics, I had a Bible placed on the front of the card, and I gave him the words I wanted placed on the outside of the card, and then I gave him the words for the inside of the card. I mailed it out that night, and when Connie received it, she went to the hospital and gave it to her father. And when Sam read the card, he said, "Where did this card come from?" And she said, "Terrance, the man that we visit in prison." And so after Sam had read the card, she took a piece of tape and taped it to one of the walls in his hospital room. So later that day, when Connie's mother, Louise, came to visit, she inquired about the card. And once again, Connie said the card came from Terrance. So her mother, Louise, sent me a thank you card, thanking me for the greeting card I sent her husband. And she placed a book of stamps in the envelope. So I went back to the card maker, had him make me a thank you card, thanking her for her thank you card. And that was the beginning of correspondence between Connie's mother, Louise, and I. Louise became one of my biggest supporters, always sending me thinking of you cards, words of encouragement. Whenever I would get ready to go to the parole board, she would say prayers for me. And when the parole board would deny me parole, she would say, "Keep the faith, grandson, keep the faith." Unfortunately, Connie's father lost his life, but my relationship with Connie's mother survived, and we continued writing. In a very short period of time, I found myself confiding in Louise. And one night I wrote her and I said, "You know, it's amazing how one's perspective changes when they get older." I said, when I was a kid, I was very jealous of my childhood friends who had grandmothers who baked them cookies and took them on trips and do the things that grandmothers do. You see, my mother's mother died when I was very young of cancer, and I never met my biological father, so I don't know his mother. I told Louise, when I reflect upon my community, there were grandmother figures who resided in my community who did not have grandsons. And I could have been the grandson they didn't have, and they could have been the grandmother I didn't have. And while there may not have been any blood relation, we could have enjoyed the relationship. But I told Louise that, of course, I could not have conjured up such an idea as a kid. It's only something that I've come to realize as a man. Louise wrote me back and she says, "You know, Terrance, sometimes you say the most profound things in your letters. And what you said about never having a grandmother touched me deeply." She then told me she would consider it an honor if from this day forward, I would consider her my Grandma Louise. And that's how she signed the letter, Grandma Louise. Now that caught me off guard, an Italian Sicilian woman offering to be a grandmother to an African-American man serving time for murder in prison. I didn't see that one coming. But from then on, she was my grandma. And something happened. Grandma has a son, which is Connie's brother, Sebastian, who's a good son, goes to his mom's house every day, makes lunch for them. One day he was having lunch with his mother, and she handed him one of my letters and said, "I want you to read something." And after he read the letter, he says, I got to meet this guy. So I sent him a visiting form. He filled it out. Next time Bruce came to see me, Sebastian came with him. Connie and Bruce and I always greet each other with a hug when they come to visit me. So I gave Bruce the regular hug, and then I extended my hand to Sebastian for a handshake. And he said, no, I want my hug too. As if we knew each other forever. So him and I took off on a really good start. So it reached a point where I would get visits from all three of them, or I'd get visits from Bruce alone or Sebastian. And one day Sebastian came up by himself. And he said, you sent Mom a photograph of you, didn't you? I said, I most certainly did. I thought she should know what her grandson looks like. And then we laughed for a moment. He says, where do you think the photograph is? I said, well, maybe in the living room. He says, no. I said, in her bedroom? He said, no. He said, you're not even close. He says, Mom has a commercial size refrigerator. And on the front of that refrigerator is a huge circle of photographs that represents our family tree. He says, where do you think your photo is? And before I could answer, he said, dead center of our family tree. And I had a visual of that, all these white faces and one black face in the middle. And he says, it's always funny when he's over his mother's house and one of the relatives or friends will spot my photo for the first time. And they take a double take and he's just sitting there observing it. And then they say, Louise, who is that? And Grandma, in a very nonchalant manner, said, oh, that's my grandson. And then the person has a look on their face like, well, maybe there's something we don't know about Louise. And then after a slight pause, she will turn and explain who I am. So now I had 5 members of his family showering me with love and not being judgmental. And more than anything, they showed me that they didn't care about what I did. And they were just showing me agape love. And I could see that they believed in me. They saw something more in me than I was at that time seeing in myself. And so I saw my behavior change in prison. Not only did I participate in self-help groups, but I became the facilitator of those groups. I was taking part in everything in prison that was positive. I joined a refurbishing program at Soledad, a computer refurbishing program that was sponsored by a company known as Detweiler. And Detweiler provided us with computer cases, motherboards, all the components we need to build computers. And this company would receive requests from K-12 schools throughout California. They would call them up and say, we need 100 systems or 150, 200 systems, and we would build those systems and ship them to the schools at no cost to them. During the time I participated in this program, we sent more than 25,000 computers to K-12 schools. And this gave me and other prisoners something to feel good about, because even though we'd been removed from society because we demonstrated we didn't deserve to be in society, we were actually making contributions from within. And I used to think about those 25,000 computers and wonder how many kids actually had access to those computers and how many lives we had impacted. If you came into our shop, which was a really huge shop, and you looked around the molding, we had cards all around the molding in the entire shop where there were cards from kids thanking us for their computers. And they knew that we were prisoners, which we found rather amazing that their parents allowed them to send greeting cards to prisoners. So that helped change my image of myself, because all of a sudden I had things about me that people valued. I was making contributions in various ways. Something else miraculous happened in 2006 with the help of 35 other prisoners. We started a Toastmasters International Club at the Central Facility in Soledad. As a matter of fact, I was the first president of that club. And I attended Toastmaster meetings from 2006 up until the point in which they released me on December the 6th of 2014 after serving 30 years. When I returned to society, the guys in prison were telling me, don't tell anybody you've been to prison because they'll discriminate. I've told everybody since I've been in prison. I remember 2 months after my release, I went on the internet looking for a Toastmasters club, and I found True Talking Toastmasters, a Silicon Valley club. So I went to the meeting, and as they do at all Toastmasters club, They asked the guests to stand and say something about themselves. I stood up, told them my name, told them I've been a Toastmaster since 2006. I mentioned all the awards that I've won as a Toastmaster. And then I told them, what you don't know about my club, it's located within a prison. And these are people that work for Apple, Amazon, IBM, all the high-tech companies. And I went on to tell them more about myself. And to my surprise, at the end of my speech, they gave me a standing ovation. At the end of the meeting, they encouraged me to join the club, which I did. And a couple of months later, when they held executive body elections, I was nominated as VP of the company, which I accepted, and they voted me in. The following year, they nominated me as their president. I accepted, they voted me in. From 2017 to 2018, I was the Toastmaster International Area B6 Director, which means all of the clubs in Cupertino were under my leadership and guidance, including the ones at Apple and Amazon. Now, why am I telling you this? Because so often you watch television and you see guys get out of prison. It's the same old thing. They go back to the same lifestyle. They're back in trouble again. And you're not going to hear about the ones of us who come out and do good. I've been working with the California Adult Parole Division since I've been out. We're men who serve time like me, men and women who serve long sentences that return to society and have issues like residency and employment. These individuals come to my meeting and we come up with solutions. I've been working with at-risk youth since I've been out, in church settings, in youth centers, giving kids life skills and sharing my story so that they may not make the same mistakes that I make. Why was I able to leave prison and make such accomplishments? I'm sure it has everything to do with the love and the affection that I received from these two individuals who are here today. You know, it's funny because once they embraced me the way they did, I actually came to understand what it means to belong to a family. Because in reality, I never made a family connection with my family because I thought a family is a mother, father, and children. All I had was a mother. But this family here, they've embraced me in a way that I never could have expected. And so when I was released, I wrote a book, my autobiography, which is entitled My 30 Years with the California Department of Corrections. I wrote that book because I felt compelled to write it, because how often do you hear about a relationship between people of different races that's positive? Sure, you can turn on the television and see negative things between blacks and whites all day long, but have you ever heard of a story where someone traveled from Saratoga to Soledad for more than 20 years visiting me? And do you know what that entails? They would have to get up very early in the morning, probably I would say 4 o'clock or so, 3 o'clock, and make the drive because it's going to take them 2 or 3 hours for the system to process them in to where they can come inside the institution. And believe me, the people that process in visitors, they do everything they can to discourage them from coming. They treat them like prisoners because they really don't like to see us get visits. And the reality is most people in prison do not get visits. I was an exception to the rule to have the sort of people visiting me that I had visiting me where I could go out and visit and eat whatever I want as much as I wanted. Each one of them would carry the maximum amount of money that a person could bring to make sure that they always had enough money that I could eat whatever I wanted and drink whatever I wanted. I came here today to share this extraordinary story with you because my life is unbelievable. When I look at my life, sometimes I just really shake my head at it because I never could have expected to go into prison one way and come out of prison another way. When I entered the prison system, Southern Mexicans and blacks were arch enemies. So most of the time when you hear about riots in prison, it's blacks and Southern Mexicans. Southern Mexicans wanted to kill me when I first came to prison. But on my final night in prison at Soledad, I was sitting in a circle at an AVP meeting. And it was approximately 35 of us in the circle and a woman named Linda McHugh, who I trained as an AVP facilitator. And she looked at all the guys in the circle and she said, you guys know this is T's, they called me T in there. She said, you know this is T's last night with us, he's going home in the morning. And so she took her glasses off and she began talking about me and what I meant to her, because when she first came into the institution to learn to be a facilitator, she was terrified. And I told her, you don't have to worry about anybody in here doing anything to you, because me and my guys are not going to let anybody do anything to you. And she got to a point where she told us she feels safer when she's in Soledad than she does in society. So she began telling me what I meant to her, thanking me for training her and all that I did to assist her in becoming the facilitator that she is today. And then tears began to fall from her eyes. And so she passed it to the next guy. And I'm sitting in a circle with guys that are Mexicans, that are Asians, that are white, that are black. And a lot of these guys have tattoos, head all the way down, sleeves, the whole 9 yards. All of us are muscle bound because we lifted weights in there. And these guys began to tell me what I meant to them, how much their lives has changed because I trained them as facilitators, and that they started coming to my groups, the impact it's had on their kids. And before you know it, everybody in the circle was crying. And for the first couple of people, I was able to refrain myself. I was holding back my tears. I'm still trying to be that macho guy. But probably 1/4 around the circle, I started crying too. Everybody in the room is crying. And I'm looking at this situation saying, wait a minute. I came in to a system that was highly racially charged. And yet I'm sitting in a circle of guys from all races, and all these guys have love for me. They were all told me they're happy that the parole board let me go, but they're going to miss me. And I could tell they meant it. It was very heartfelt. And there's no way that at the beginning of my sentence, I could have imagined that when I left prison, circumstances could have changed so much. But what happened with us is we started communicating with each other up close and personal. That's what happens in an AVP workshop. We have to do exercises where we're looking another man in the eye and talking about things we normally wouldn't talk about. And we discovered that even though we were different races, many of us have the same background, no father, living in poverty, the whole 9 yards. So we realized we have more in common than different. I've seen some of these men that I trained on the inside that have been released, and I see them on the internet, and they're all doing well. And so what I want you to take away from this, none of the people in jail and prison are bad people. They're just people who have made bad decisions based on bad information. And if you understood the communities and the households a lot of these people come from, you would understand why they make bad decisions. And so I think my life has came full circle because I was a very angry kid that I didn't have a father that affected my behavior. And now today, I'm reaching out to kids who are just like me, no father in the home, whether it's because there's no dad, period, or he's someone in and out of jail and prison, or it's just someone paying the bills but not proactively involved in the kid's life, giving them any sort of guidance and nurturing. So I get great satisfaction in what I'm doing. And I know that none of this would be possible without divine intervention. There's no doubt in my mind that God brought Bruce into my life, his family. How else could a Black man in prison meet a guy who's a real estate agent, broker, and land developer from Saratoga? No way. And I have not taken for granted what they've done for me, because I didn't come from a home where my mother volunteered. I wasn't even, matter of fact, I don't even know anyone who volunteers, but his volunteering heart more or less impacted me to where I know that more than anything, I have to give back. And that's why I'm proud to be a part of his Rotary Club, where I can do the things we do to make a difference in other people's lives. And I'm sure at ETF and empowering the fatherless, we're going to do some great things in terms of changing lives. So when I look in the mirror today, I like the person I see. I can actually say I love myself. I'm not going to put myself in harm's way in no shape or form. And I'm trying to live my life in a way that demonstrates that I'm very appreciative that I've been given a second chance. Because during my incarceration, I didn't know if I would ever leave prison or if I would die in prison. And so now, more than anything, my goal is to let others know that violence is never the solution, that hurting another person is never going to solve anything. And I believe that in my contact with kids, I get this across, and I think I get it across in contact with adults. I'm proud to say that my organization Empowering the Fatherless is currently in the Santa Clara County Jail System. I recently graduated 18 guys from my effective communication program, and now I have another group of guys that are going through my self-esteem program. I'm in negotiation with people right now to try to get my programs in other institutions, including Goodwill. So even though I spent 30 years in prison, I would not trade that for anything, because I know there's no way that I could be the person I am today without my 30 years of incarceration. Thank you for your time.